Hi, my name is Miguel Souzou Sierra. I am technical designer and world builder here at Soulbound Studios, working on Chronicles of Elyria. And today we're going to go through a walkthrough of the Silver Run mine. Now, this level was made for two reasons: to function as our PAX East demo and as part of Prologue, which is a larger release at some point in the future. As part of the narrative of the Prologue, you're going to be called for to investigate Silver Run Mine because there have been rumors of a kind of madness infecting the people inside of the mine, and so you're tasked to see if there's any truth to that. Now, upon entering the mine, it actually collapses behind you. Going forward, the mine itself is in a serious state of disarray. There are no miners to be found, but there's definitely signs of what looks like to be a collapse of both the literal and figurative infrastructure of the mine, so something's wrong. First, we're treated with the Lagoon Room. Now, this was the first room that I designed for this area. My goal was to introduce parkour to players in a way that allowed them to learn the mechanics without creating too many points of friction. Part of the development process for this room was to actually iterate on some of those points of friction, because the original design involved what is essentially a leap of faith, and we found that it was just too intense and demanding for players who just got their hands on the game, and it resulted in a lot of deaths, which is never good when you're just starting off a demo. We changed that so that it's almost impossible to die here. It teaches players in a fairly safe environment the main mechanics of parkour. So number one, ledge traversal. You can traverse ledges left, right. You can also jump between ledges. As you can see, your character reacts to whichever direction you're placed in by reaching out their hand to indicate that's the direction they're going to jump. Moving off from the ledge, of course, you're treated with some interesting imagery and an example of world building. That skeleton there has a story. This whole place has a story, in fact. It takes place in an area called Titan Step. Silver Run Mine, Silver Run, and the city of New Haven all are in an area called Titan Step. And there's definitely a reason for that. It likely has something to do with the giant skeletons, but that'll be discovered at a later date. Another mechanic that we're showing off here is the fact that you can jump onto ledges and other parkourable areas. If you are to just fall, you'll land on that platform, which we added so players wouldn't die if they failed that first attempt, which we found was actually more common than we thought. So, furthermore, this whole bridge area is designed so that basically no matter what you do, whether you walk off, whether you jump off, whether you run off, you will land in a safe zone. So, moving on from the Lagoon Room, you go to the Equipment Room. Now, the goal of this room was to give players a safe place for combat, as well as to help establish the topology of the mine. When I went about designing the mine, I wanted to make sure that there was a functional and logical reason for why any of the rooms existed, rather than just slap a couple of rooms together and call it a mine. As you can see, the miner doesn't actually move. He's stuck, essentially. And this was just to take off a lot of the pressure that the AI movement adds to combat. As you can see, there's actually a collapsed door, and that collapsed door is actually another path that at one point you could have taken, and you'll actually find the exit of that path in another room further on the mine, which you'll see in a bit. But for now, we venture forward into what is essentially the first real combat encounter. You can see that there are two miners. Something's wrong with them, that's clear, by the way that they're grasping their head and shaking. So perhaps those rumors were not rumors after all. There are a couple ways that people approach this room. People who run head-on in essentially end up aggroing both of the miners. Makes it a more difficult fight, but as you can see, you can kite them individually. We wanted to balance the room in such a way that it provided a sense of danger without being too difficult, because we didn't want to have something too frustrating early on. However, once you move past this room, you're greeted with the biggest combat challenge in the demo. I wanted there to be a surprise, essentially, because fun is oftentimes challenges with surprises. And so, you leave that first combat encounter thinking you're fine, and then suddenly, boom, you drop down and plummet down this slick, collapsed walkway into what we call the loading room, where a lot of the ore and materials from the mine pass through in order to be essentially ferried up to the second floor and then removed and brought out from the mine. It's also one of the largest rooms in the whole demo. So designing the mine, there was a certain structure to the rooms that I wanted to maintain. Essentially, when you enter the mine, the rooms are filled with a lot of open space, a lot of organic elements, and a lot of natural lighting. And I contrast this with the areas towards the end of the mine to help create a shift in the atmosphere of the level. As you continue to descend into the mine, things get more claustrophobic, they're less well lit, there's less organic structures, they're less open, and that definitely creates a palpable feeling of being oppressed, of being uncomfortable. It sort of hints at how the environment also reflects the ominous forces that are found deep within the mine. The thing with the loading room is that you really want to try and kite the enemies one by one. Otherwise, you're going to get rushed and overwhelmed. The way that we go about combat in Chronicles of Elyria is fairly realistic. For the most part, if you're ever in a situation where there's 3 or 4 combatants and you're the sole adversary, you're probably going to get messed up. You know, 1-on-1, that's a test of skill. 3-on-1, 4-on-1, realistically, that's not really a fight that most people can walk away from. So, there's a subtle progression from bright, more colorful, stronger hued lighting in the beginning of the mine to a more subdued, darker color palette to sort of build to the atmosphere that you're going to find yourself in. This was the first real parkour challenge that we introduced in this level. After learning all the skills from the initial parkour introduction area, the lagoon room, you have basically everything you need in order to successfully complete this challenge, provided that you are able to look around and observe your environment. If you haven't noticed by now, there is a visual signifier that we use. And it's that white decal, and we use that white decal on anything that's parkourable, and it shows you a general path of where to go. One of the problems with this jump was that it requires a mechanic that we were not able to teach players as a result of one of the iterations, and it's the wall jump. Turns out jumping backwards off of a wall is not something that most people are very inclined to do without knowing for a fact that they can. This area, of course, can be reached, and you can begin the parkour challenge without killing any of the enemies. You can skip them completely, but that ultimately ensures that if you fail, you're probably going to die, because, like I said, 1 enemy is fine, 2 enemies, maybe, but 3 or 4 enemies, dropping right into the midst of them, and they pretty quickly overwhelm you. And so, you successfully manage to parkour through this area, all while hopefully being led upwards by the large hole and the beams of light shining through them, as well as that lantern hanging right there. It's all meant to sort of lead you out. The verticality, again, you're ascending rather than descending, and you come across the upper part of the loading room, where you see that crane was used to lift some of the materials, and you see some of the materials already packaged in those boxes, which are then meant to be transported. Walking outside of the loading room, you come across this series of catwalks. There's a collapsed bridge further down to the right that would have led you to the other side of the cavern. It was, of course, one of the primary ways that they transported ores back and forth from the 2 areas of the mine. This is a lot of the more factory-like areas of the mine. You know, it's where equipment's stored, it's where things are processed, it's where things are transported. But across from here, you run into the actual mine shafts. The mine itself is integrated into this natural cave system, which the people of Silver Run came across originally. And so, as you can see, a lot of these areas are not necessarily fully carved out and man-made structures, but a lot of it is made with the pre-existing layout of the caverns as they found them. This room is meant to serve as the turning point in the mine. As the focal point, it's really supposed to distinguish the first half and the second half. So you have the largest room, you have the most organic elements, you've got the rushing river, but you've also got tons of broken infrastructure. You've got lots of natural lighting, you've got these huge holes in the cave, and so there's a lot of visual elements to take in, but it's meant to serve as a transition point from the organic and the open to the claustrophobic and the closed and the man-made. And this zip line is specifically there to really drive that point home. Because the way the zip line is done, there's no returning. Once you cross the threshold, you're stuck here. And as you might have just noticed, as soon as you got to the other side of the zip line, the background music changed. And so it's now gone from a fairly somewhat adventurous, but certainly more upbeat and subtle soundtrack to a far more chilling, creepy, atmospheric one. Because essentially upon entering this part of the mine, you're no longer in the action-venture portions, you're in the action-horror portions. Like we've been saying before, there is an overall narrative to this, and whatever's happening in this mine is ominous. And so you're going to be finding a lot more of those horror elements showing up. Looking ahead of you, you've got the foreman's room. The goal was to provide topology and lore with this room, and again, to establish that this mine is actually supposed to be a functional mine within Elyria. The foreman, of course, serving as sort of the linchpin for all of the goings-ons of the mine, and sort of the backbone of a lot of the infrastructure, would have his own room because his presence in the mine is pretty valuable. Moving on, you reach another transportation room, which we essentially called the fog cave. And so the goal of this room was to provide the final parkour challenge, and as such, I designed this challenge to be the most difficult. At first, you're not sure whether you're supposed to go to the left, so you look around. I'm really challenging players here to analyze their surroundings and take what they've learned and apply it. An astute player might notice that there are some of those white decals that have been popping up. And so that kind of gives you an indication of at least where there's functionality regarding parkour. Progressing through this area, I really like how well the parkour mechanics and the environment mesh together. The actual structures on which you parkour feel like they exist very organically within the world. And it's the final separation of the beginning area and the mine shafts. The goal of this demo was to show off parkour in combat and to give evidence regarding how Chronicles of Elyria differs from other MMOs. We consider ourselves far more action-oriented because we believe that to be heroic, you need to truly do something heroic. Heroism doesn't come easy. It requires skill, and we didn't want that to be a virtual skill. We wanted real player skill to come into the equation. While in this demo, there are some places that are walled off. In the main game, ultimately what you see is what you get, and that's a design mentality that we kind of adhere to. There's never going to be any invisible walls. If you can feasibly get there, and there's nothing blocking your path, there will be a way for you to do it. Our goal for this demo was to show off some of the elements of Chronicles of Elyria that makes Chronicles of Elyria different from other MMOs. Hopefully we managed to do that. If you have any more questions or you want to find out more about the design of the game, please go to chroniclesofelyria.com where you can learn more, you can engage with our community, and you can ask questions. So as we said in the beginning of the video, this demo actually takes place as part of the overall narrative of the prologue, which means that it doesn't actually end here. In the prologue, you're going to journey further into the mine and uncover some of the secrets that lie within.